Chapter 4 Griselda. The following afternoon Miguel took the helm and steered the Ponga homeward. As the boat skimmed past the rock reef, Tomas stood on the bow and looked down into the red-orange sea, which now reflected the colors of the sunset. He saw nothing larger than the parrotfish. The Ponga shot out of the cove and into the shallows, which lay between the island and the peninsula. The water was only about 15 feet deep. Many sharks came here to give birth to their live young or to lay eggs, as some do. Into these protected waters also came old and ill sharks. They could slow their continuous swimming by heading into the currents and letting the swiftly flowing water rush through their gills. They used less energy this way and could rest and heal themselves. And into these waters came the Torres men to maintain their reputation as Laredo's best shark fishermen. The shallows were sometimes called the Torres. In mid-current, Tomas raised his hand to signal Miguel to slow down the boat. He leaned far out and looked for his shark, but saw only the sand sculptures on the bottom that had been carved by the currents, and a silver river of anchovies. They were spreading out and sinking as they prepared to sleep for the night. "Okay," Tomas called to Miguel. "Go on." Hardly had he spoken than the anchovies flashed like a single warning light and were gone. The sea bottom was clear of fish, but Tomas had dropped to his seat and did not see this message from the anchovies. Miguel speeded up the motor. The wind tugged at Tomas's Mexican soccer team cap, and he took it off, smiling as his hair whipped across his broad brown forehead. There was no Spanish galleon, but somewhere around here there was a shark for him. 5 miles south of Coronados Island, the village of Laredo came into view. Miguel took a fix on the mission bell tower and steered toward it. The low, red sun shone through its arched Byzantine windows, turning them into a fiery lighthouse. The mission bell tower had been a navigational guide for the seamen of Laredo since 1695. That year, a mule that was carrying the statue of the Virgin for a new mission stopped in its tracks and refused to go on. Interpreting this as a message from God, Jesuit Father Juan Maria Salvatierra ordered the mission be built on the spot where the mule was standing. Since its completion, the mission has been transferred from the Jesuits to Franciscan monks, bombarded in battle with Baja Indians, and then U.S. troops cared for, neglected, and most recently rebuilt. Whether whole or standing in ruins, the bell tower guided the fishermen of Laredo home to their families. A ray of light struck the glass windows in the dome and set off a sun flash. Tomas smiled. A sunburst was a very good omen no matter where you saw one, but particularly on the tower of the mission of Laredo. "That cancels the Black Cross," he said to himself, and looked forward to the weekend. The wind, which had begun to rise around 2 p.m., as it does every afternoon on the Sea of Cortez, blew gradually stronger, until the Ponga was buried between waves. Miguel steered up their steep slopes, sailed off their crests, and crashed down into dark troughs. Spray flew 10 feet high as they sped along the beach where Victorio, the sport-fishing fleet captain, kept his 12 boats. Tomas counted them. They were all in. Victorio brought the gringos home at 1 p.m., before the winds arose. In the prankish waves close to shore, several of Tomas's classmates bobbed. They laughed and shouted as they rode to the tops of crests that sparkled with the reflected Christmas lights of houses along the beach. Among the swimmers was Griselda, the girl from Mexico City. Tomas called out and waved to her. She splashed water and waved back. Griselda was like no other girl Tomas knew. She had come from a Mexico he did not know. Like no other girl, she waited for him at the Café au Lait and walked to school with him, and like no other girl he knew, her parents were divorced, and a word he had had to look up in the dictionary. She and her mother had moved to Laredo to live with Griselda's uncle Victorio and his wife Barbara. Griselda was quite beautiful, but very unusual looking by Tomas's mestizo standards. Her skin was a creamy tan, her eyes were almost green, and her hair, which fell to her shoulders in waves, was light brown. Griselda had inherited her lovely coloring from her Norwegian father. Although she smiled and looked happy in school, Tomas knew she was not. She sometimes cried as she walked with him to the junior high. "I am homesick for Mexico City," she had told him one day when he had asked about her tears. "It is so busy and beautiful, with so much to do." He had tried to cheer her up that day by telling her about the Spanish galleon on the top of the volcano. She had laughed and looked at him doubtfully. A few days ago, when he had sensed her unhappiness, he had dared to tell her about his whale shark. She liked his story and had even clapped when he came to the part where he, Tomas, held the shark high and the mission bells rang. "That's fun," she had said. "I would like to see that. A whale shark over your head would make Laredo bearable." Griselda went out of Tomas's mind as the Ponga sped past the Mission Hotel and the palm leaf-covered trailer where Tia and Tio, two retired Americans, lived. They taught English to the children and adults of Laredo as a gift of thanks to the Mexicans for being so warm and hospitable. The boat dashed past the Siesta Inn, where the sports fishermen stayed, and a few small casas, then headed in to the commercial fishermen's beach. Miguel ran the Ponga ashore. Tomas was home. The three fishermen jumped out and smiled to a group of unemployed men who were idling away time on the beach. They gathered around to watch the Torreses unload. Watching is a national pastime in Mexico, and only occasionally does someone step forward to help. When the boat was unloaded, Ramon sought out a sharp-eyed man sitting under a palm tree, wearing a waist-length fur coat. "Do you have time to pull us up, Zorro?" Ramon asked, although the man was obviously doing nothing. Zorro, the fox, nodded and got to his feet. His skinny bare legs stuck out from under the fur coat like lollipop sticks. He had fair skin that was deeply tanned and eyes as yellow as his namesake's. Zorro beckoned to a group of men with their hands in their pockets. "Come," he said, and they shuffled forward, grabbed the sides of the Ponga, and on a signal from Toro ran the boat swiftly up the beach to above the high tide line. There it would sit until Monday morning, when the Torreses would go to sea again. They would not need Zorro and his cronies for the launch. At 5 a.m. the tide would be lapping the stern of the Ponga, and it was easily pushed into the water. After thanking Zorro, Ramon lifted a large bundle of shark fins to his shoulder. Salted and dried, they were ready to be sold to the wholesaler. "Did you see the oficiales?" Zorro asked him. "Not a sign of them," Ramon answered. "Strange," said Zorro. "It is rumored that they are here to speak to us commercial fishermen." Ramon shifted his load. "What do you make of it?" "Who knows?" asked Zorro. "Oficiales are crazy." Tomas threw his bag of belongings over his shoulder and walked up the wide dirt street, leaving his grandfather and uncle discussing the peculiarities of government with Zorro. Above him the branches of old mesquite and olive trees along the street bent and rustled as the winds of evening blew through them. Children laughed behind palm leaf fences and ran in the street. Cocks crowed, dogs barked, and pigs grunted. The sounds were comforting and reassuring to Tomas. He was home. A firecracker went off. "Jose," he said, and grinned. "He's done it again." His friend Jose was a dreamer too, but he did not dream about catching sharks. He dreamed about making gorgeous fireworks that would light up the sky above Laredo on every holiday, and especially on Christmas Eve. Tomas stopped at the crossroads and looked across the wide arroyo that separated Colonia Zaragoza, the fishermen's district, from the busy center of Laredo. The dusty desert town had taken on an air of enchantment and fiesta. Christmas lights glittered in shop windows along the main street and on street lamps and palm trees. Through the rosy sunlit dust he could faintly make out the plaza, tree-lined and spacious. The government workers who had been fitting small stones between the flooded bricks on the plaza were getting up off their hands and knees and packing away their tools. The day's work was over. They would collect their daily 5,000 pesos and go home. Many would stop by the beer hall beforehand, and some of these, Tomas well knew, would not make it home until morning. This was the beginning of the 2-week celebration of the birth of Jesus, a time for music, dancing, fireworks, and breaking piñatas. Tomas hurried toward his grandfather's casa, the third palm leaf enclosure from the corner. The gate was open to greet the fisherman, and he ran in. "Anyone home?" he called. "Tomas!" A little girl with black curly hair ran out of the nearest of 3 palapas and into his arms. "Maria," he said, swinging her around, "why are you so excited?" "I'm helping your mother," the 5-year-old answered. "Francisca and I are putting beautiful red crepe paper around the picture of the Lady of Guadalupe. We are making an altar, a pretty Christmas altar. Come see it." Maria pulled him down the earthen path to a palm-thatched roof that served as a foyer. Next to this was the kitchen, a palapa hung with pots and pans and open on two sides to the breeze and the light. Across from the foyer stood a three-walked room, and beyond it 2 4-walled sleeping palapas. On one of these hung a white cloth, on which a calendar painted of the Virgin of Guadalupe was mounted. She was encircled with crepe paper and cascades of cherry red bougainvillea. "It's beautiful, Maria," Tomas exclaimed, and squeezed her hand. Little Maria was a distant relative whose parents had died last year. When Digna, Miguel's wife, had learned about the orphan, she had gone to La Paz and brought her back to Ramon's casa. The happy little Maria helped to soothe Digna's grief over the loss of her own children, and she spoiled her as much as she did Tomas. To Tomas, his little adopted sister was wonderful and funny, and he enjoyed her enormously. He admired the altar once more, then walked out to behind the outhouse, where his mother was taking down the laundry. He greeted her warmly, but with restraint. He was 14 now and talking politics with the men. This required a new dignity of him. Francisca sensed this and nodded respectfully. "You are getting big," she said. "Every time you come back from the island you are wider and taller." He laughed, and she put an arm around him. Tomas felt her happiness spill over into him. He broke down and hugged her. Then he pushed away. "The oficiales want to talk to us fishermen," he said, authoritatively. Francisca frowned and picked up the basket of clothes. She, too, shared the national dread for the oficiales. "What will they do?" "Nobody knows. We'll have to wait and see." Francisca smiled at Tomas's forbearance. He was usually an impatient child. How proud his father would be to see his son coming of age. She still grieved for his father and for herself. Without him she was just another pair of hands doing what had to be done. With him she had been a woman of importance. "We'll have to wait and see," Tomas repeated, and walked off to the three-sided palapa where he slept. The baby bed that had held Tomas, his cousins, and now Maria stood on one side of the room. Behind it was a chest of drawers. On a wooden rod slung between the beams hung the family's wardrobe, perhaps 2 or 3 outfits for each person, most well worn. Shoes, hats, and boxes were lined up neatly on the strip below the roof. Tomas sat down on his bed, a hand-woven pad on the floor. Near his pillow sat a box. He opened it and took out a steel spearhead and whetstone, both of which had belonged to his father. He began sharpening the spearhead. When it was too dark to see, he joined his grandmother, Dolores, in the kitchen. She was flattening balls of corn dough into perfect circles with her tortilla press. Cactus fruit and yellowtail fish fillets dipped in cornmeal were frying in a pan that sat on legs above a small fire on the sandbox stove. There was no electricity in the Torres' casa. "It's very dangerous," Ramon said. "It killed a friend of mine, charred him like a chicken thrown into the hot coals. I will never have electricity in my house." Nobody missed it. The family went to bed and got up with the sun, and water was provided by the town pump. It came into the casa through a long green hose. The one radio, which belonged to Miguel, ran on batteries. "Smells good," Tomas said to his grandmother, a slender woman with dark eyes and a finely shaped nose reminiscent of the nose of a woman in one of those old Spanish paintings in the Mission. Dolores was not far from her Spanish ancestors. As the head of Ramon's household, she was greatly respected by Francisca and Digna. Ramon and Miguel adored her, as did Tomas, but his love for her was not the same as his love for his mother. She came first. Tomas leaned close to watch his grandmother work. She brushed him away. "Dinner will soon be ready," she said. "Go fetch Ramon and Miguel. They must still be at the fish buyer's casa." Hardly had she spoken when Ramon and Miguel opened the gate and stepped inside, talking seriously. Dolores and Digna hurried to greet them. The gate clicked shut. The Torreses were all home, safely gathered within the walls of their land. Here in the cozy shadows, lit only by the flickering light of the cooking fire, they all felt safe from worldly troubles, the oficiales, the dwindling fish supply, and the wholesaler who, once again, had not paid the going rate for shark fins. The next buyer, he knew, was 100 miles away in La Paz. Ramon and Miguel pulled the water hose under the pomegranate tree and showered themselves while also watering the plant. Water is precious in the desert. "What's for dinner?" Miguel asked as he sat down on the long blue table. "Napolitos and fish," answered Dolores, "and a surprise. Peppers stuffed with shrimp." "My favorite," said Tomas, plunking himself down in his chair. When the main courses were finished, Digna, who was in charge of desserts, passed around her dates stuffed with sugar and nuts. Then she sat down close to Miguel and smiled up at him. Digna had a wide, flat face with round, rosy cheeks. Her curly hair was quite beautiful, but Tomas had little time for her. She talked only about Maria and Miguel and the children she was going to have some day. She even had names for them. "She dreams, too," Tomas said of her one day, "but not of great things like ships and sharks." Digna lit a candle when the cook fire died down. In the soft light the Torres men drank their coffee and discussed the Japanese factory boats. The wholesaler had gone aboard one in La Paz, and what he had seen astonished Ramon and Miguel. It was, he had said, a city, with stores and storerooms, offices, and equipment for processing fish, and things that even the wholesaler did not understand. The women were quite quiet during the discussion. Presently Maria climbed into her bed and softly sang herself to sleep. When the coffee cups were empty, Digna wiped them clean and followed Miguel to their bedroom palapa. Ramon and Dolores held hands in the darkness for a little while, listening to the low, trilling call of the lesser nighthawks. When the owls called, they too went off to bed. Francisca was still up, kneeling in prayer before the Lady of Guadalupe. Presently she went off to her sleeping mat in the palapa with Tomas and Maria. Tomas was in bed, but not asleep. He had pulled his blanket over his head and was reading by flashlight a book on sharks that Juan Fuertes had lent him. "Whale sharks are sluggish," he read, then thought about the shark of the reef. "My shark fits that description perfectly," he thought, and clicked off his light, smiling to himself. From across the arroyo came the music of the mariachi band at the Laredo Cabaret. The first song of the all-night 14-day celebration rang out. Tomas was glad he had a shark to think about, for it was going to be a long, sleepless night. The 2-week-long Christmas festival was in full swing.